It's a pleasure to welcome you to our panel discussion focusing on intersection of mental health. Today, we have amazing group of panelists who are making important contributions in their respective fields. More introduction about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor and pleasure to be here. So thank you, Letters to Strangers, for having us and coordinating this amazing panel. My name is Amanda Lipp. I'm a documentary filmmaker specializing in mental health and also the founder of the Giving Gallery, which is a platform for artists to share their story and sell their art, and proceeds support partnered mental health charities that we have. So it's all about philanthropy, storytelling, and technology. And I'm personally really passionate about mental health. I come to this space as a peer with lived experience, having gone through the psychiatric hospital system. So I really feel passionate about using that empathy and lived experience to pay it forward and to create meaningful films and platforms and technology that supports people's mental health and hopefully creates a better system in the process. Thank you.
So it is a pleasure to be here on this platform with all of you guys. And so my name is Shalom Mitchell. I am part of the Onyx Family. So we are a YouTube creator content space where we're able to create content for kids and family. So we kind of do it all. We act, we sing, we do all sorts of things. And, alongside of just doing content that is just most likely just, fun and just enjoyable for kids and stuff, we try to provide a space where we can even highlight some people who are in need to look at a space where we can help others. Like we have this original YouTube series called Onyx Family Dinner. We had our own Diana Chow on it. So she was able to promote Letters to Strangers, and a whole bunch of other people were able to be on there. So yes, we like to create space for others just as much as, being able to provide content for others as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Clayton. I am a founder member of Letters to Strangers and currently serve as the organization's chief learning officer. I'm responsible for lots of our educational initiatives. I'm particularly responsible for the Mental Health Changemaker and Mental Health Warrior Scholarship that we run every spring. I'm also currently a PhD student in political science at UCLA. So I'm here mostly to sort of share a perspective on how to go through the world of politics in a way that feels productive rather than feels depressing and alienating.
Nice, nice. I'm Timothy Liyada. I'll be your host. So we'll be co-hosting with the Clayton because sometimes that's why you can't see my picture because I'm trying to, the network connectivity here is poor for now. So Amanda, it's really interesting. Your story is really interesting. So can visual storytelling contribute to a better understanding of mental health challenges that young people often face? And how do you envision the future of mental health care and storytelling, specifically in the context of supporting the youth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel that storytelling can benefit youth in so many different ways, as far as ultimately hoping that they seek the help that they might need if they're struggling. I think at the end of the day, mental health is something that's unique to all of us in individual ways and also cultural ways. As a filmmaker, what I'm really passionate about is creating films that build trust and build rapport with young people and also their family and their caregivers. I know for me personally, a big part of my recovery was my family and my friends and my siblings and them helping me get help when I was really in a tough spot. And so the films that I make, the short documentary films that I make, are really to help youth get into treatment sooner or to get into care, whatever that care might look like for them and their identity and their specific needs. And using storytelling and technology, leveraging that in a really meaningful way. So for example, I made a short series of films with Columbia Psychiatry about 5 years ago. And the goal of that particular project was to create short films about youth psychosis in particular and follow these young people and their families and hear their experience of psychosis and what that meant to them and their identity and why they sought help or why they didn't seek help, and really just authentically capture who they are. And then we used different keywords and Google ads and I had basically a campaign in New York City through Strong 365, a partner organization, to really try to get folks into care, to see when folks are typing into Google, I need help, or I'm hearing voices, or I think I might be struggling with schizophrenia or psychosis, say, that maybe they would then be able to get to that treatment center through really thoughtful advertising and getting them into care sooner. So basically applying commercial advertising techniques in a mental health context. So connecting the story with then on the back end, how do we leverage technology and platforms like Google to get people hopefully connected to local resources in a way that feels really genuine and safe and consensual to them. And the first step usually is watching a video or seeing a story and feeling less alone.
Yes,
And hopefully reducing stigma in the process. So the last thing I'll share on that is that series of films that we made then led to a research study on using film and using visual storytelling as intervention and showing that storytelling can reduce stigma and get people into care sooner.
for sure.
So I really do feel that storytelling is super powerful because I think at the end of the day, we want to feel less alone and feel connected to other people who might get how we're feeling, and then hopefully take that step and getting care or getting support, whatever that might look like. So I think the power of storytelling and leveraging technology is incredibly powerful, especially with youth who are on their phones and Googling things and on social media and looking to their peers and looking to the interwebs for support. So then how do we thoughtfully, meaningfully navigate that in a way that feels safe and hopefully really meaningful for youth?
Amanda, you have achieved a lot in your career so far. What advice you give to young individuals who are passionate about using storytelling and technology to drive change in the mental health landscape?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is honestly that your story matters and that
Yeah.
your identity and what you have to say, your voice, your lived experience, however you identify with your mental health experience or identity is super valid. And there's someone else out there who probably really wants to hear your story. And I think for me, at least, working on my own self-worth and confidence and believing that I had a voice to share was a big part of it. And then realizing that with that voice, there's a ripple effect and that it might inspire someone else to share their story. And then they can go on and share their story. So this sort of network effect, ripple effect that first starts with us, though, I think, as humans, and feeling, yes, there is value and worth in my story, right? And that there's power in that, even if just one person hears it or a million people hear it, but that could save a life, right? That genuine storytelling from person to person or group to group or country to country, right? And I think the piece of advice I would give beyond that, and just the power of stories and our voices, is to pull up a seat at the table and to not be afraid to get involved in local to state to national boards and advocacy groups. I know for me, that was a big part of building my career was volunteering and getting involved in local suicide prevention walks and fundraisers and art auctions and events, all the way to serving on boards and having a vote and being able to change policy and hopefully improve policy and really be at the table, right? Like nothing about us without us, right? In terms of not just age and being young, but also what that lived experience might be and how do we have more representation on boards and have more diversity on boards and really make sure that we are reflecting the communities that we serve. So that was a big part of it too, which I think connects to the feelings of worth, right? And knowing that we need people at the table who have lived experience and who have a voice and have a story, because we all do. And then doing that for having an impact in that way, I think that was a big part of it.
So let's move on to Shalom. I'm really touched with the connections that you have made, the storytelling. It's really a power of two, especially what you have said about connecting the feelings and all those things to the audience. That's really powerful. Yeah, so storytelling often allows people to connect with the characters and narratives. How do you see entertainment such as your family's humor content bridging the gap between real life challenges and relatable stories that can positively influence the mental health of your audience?
So, YouTube has its ups and downs most of the time, but I'm just really happy to be able to have a platform to be able to spread positivity. So I would say me and my family's main mission is humor. We have this model that says, tell the story, feed the soul, make them laugh, heal the heart. And, studies show that laughter actually strengthens the heart muscle by the increasing of the heart rate. I'm not saying to replace your cardio by watching your own favorite comedy show, but it would be helpful for the heart to be able to add a little bit of laughter in your day. And, it's not just healing of the heart that it also helps, laughter, but it also heals the mind as well. You see, laughter actually produces a positive feeling of hormones called endorphins. Well, at the same time, it also reduces a stress hormone called cortisol. So we often say that laughter is a sort of medicine. As content creators, our jobs are not to just only provide some sort of escapism, but it's also to provide content that is healing to the heart as well as the mind.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah. You work with your family, which can certainly come with challenges. What are some of the lessons you have learned throughout this process to maintain your own space and well-being amidst times of stress when your coworkers are people you literally live with?
Oh, wow. So the transition from working with my family has been fairly easy. You see, I've been homeschooled my whole life, so I already had the practice of just being around them. And growing up, I always saw them, my siblings, as my pupils and my parents as my teachers. And so, the whole transition from the school life to the career sort of setting was, fairly easy because now I saw my siblings as now my coworkers and my parents as my bosses. And so, over time, we're able to have our own set schedule that has produced us to, now having our own space. And yes, I would say it's been fairly easy.
Wow, that's really nice. Okay, so positive role model in entertainment can have a significant impact on young individual self-perception and aspirations. How does the Onyx family seek to embody these positive influence in the content you create?
We are a kids and family brand, and that's a tall order considering that parents are entrusting us to be a good example for their kids. I already had that sort of example growing up as the oldest child, as well as also being a pastor's kid, because growing up I had to make sure I was an example to my fellow church peers. And when I think about it, I'm not sure if kids, when they go on YouTube, are looking for a good example as much as they're looking for somewhere to feel like they want to feel accepted or feel like that they belong. And so our mission, instead of just being a good example, we try and make sure that they feel like they are in a safe space. We do that by making sure that we're positive, that we're not like negative or come off as mean-spirited or judgy. We try to make sure that they're part of our family, the Onyx family. We do that by creating relatable skits that has kind of family sort of dynamics. So we do things like parents and children sort of scenarios, or siblings, or even sometimes grandparents and grandchildren. Sometimes I would dress like a grandma and just be like telling my siblings as grandchildren. So, stuff like that. Sometimes some kids feel as if we're the only healthy family example for them. And so we try and make sure that we create like a safe space for them to feel like they accept it and feel like they feel safe around our content.
Oh, nice.
Shalom, I wanted to ask a little follow-up there. As a fellow pastor's kid, actually, I know like people often talk about the dichotomy between faith being sort of a shield or a blanket for people, and faith and the church being troublesome if you have an identity that doesn't align with your congregation's values. I guess in your experience, sort of how have you been able to take both sides of those things and make it a more positive impact both on your own mental health and the mental health of your peers and members of the congregation, as well as just through the platform that you have?
So yeah, my dad was a pastor. Growing up, I honestly, when we began our career on YouTube, right? We really made sure we had a set of rules on how to be able to be an influence to others whilst also, respecting other people's faiths and other people's way of thinking and stuff. So we try and make sure that we are respectful, and we try and, like I said, focus on trying to create a safe space for others, trying to make sure everyone belongs here. We're not trying to make sure people are just separated as a sort of division. We try and make sure people are safe and they feel like they are loved. And we just try to be a good example. And being a pastor's kid, there's a lot of pressures, growing up as trying to be this also perfect person. And, my dad really emphasizes with me, not everyone is perfect, and you can just be yourself, and just being able to just be the best that you can be. And that's why we try to tell our audience to be the best that they can be in whatever field or whatever settings or environments that they're in.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great way to go about thinking about it, especially given the responsibility you feel as a kid, as a young pastor's kid, about everyone's looking at me. I got to make sure I behave myself.
Right. Yeah. My dad made sure to make sure that we were all comfortable just being who we are, and just being a good example for others in a way, pastor's kid to pastor's kid. We understand how we feel, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now I'm going to you, Clinton, as our political a politician in making. What are some of the ways you see that politics affect people's mental health? Is it always negative? Because most of the people think it's related to negative. Yeah.
Yes, this is a great question. And I think we should just be upfront about it, right? Most of the time, what you are hearing about politics sucks, right?
Yes.
It is not fun. There's an inherent bias in reporting on politics, and I think in news in general, to sort of focus on the negative. And especially over the last 15, 20 years in American politics, there's not been a ton of great news, right? And when you do hear about really good news, it's not often reported as being equally good as the bad news is. And I think that this is sort of an inherent block that we have to get over when talking about politics. Because, I haven't chosen a career in political science in learning about how this stuff works and focusing on it every day because I hate myself. Far from it. I find this stuff fascinating. And I think focusing on the positives where they exist and actively seeking them out is incredibly important to engaging with politics productively. For example, I think one of the biggest elements of politics that really gets people nowadays is the politics of climate change, right? It's an existential threat to the United States, to humanity, to the planet at large. And it seems like every single piece of news we hear about climate change is negative. And it's really, really hard not to feel just completely disillusioned by the entire experience, right? But if you think about the world of politics over the last year, would it surprise you to learn, I'll just pose this to our other panelists, that the legislation passed in the United States in the last 3 years is expected to nearly halve our climate emissions by 2040? Would that surprise you, that information?
I don't know. I feel like it's not my field of expertise, so I feel like I don't really quite know. I mean, I also feel like with the news, it's like you say, there's an inherent bias of things being negative and a disillusionment of the world's ending kind of a vibe. At the same time, there's a lot of efforts to change things and to have policy that supports a better planet. So I feel optimistic and hopeful, at the same time pragmatic about well, kind of when I see it, I'll believe it,
Sure.
So I guess I have mixed feelings, and I feel a little indifferent, to be honest. So I guess surprise, I don't know how to answer that question, but I think I feel optimistic and hopeful. But again, kind of I'll believe it when I see it, I guess, in terms of politics seems to kind of always be back and forth, that I guess there's an inherent mistrust, I think, unfortunately. So I like to look at more the data and the findings and the science, and read the books and think about, okay, well, how habitable is this earth in by 2040 anyway? But again, it's not my field of expertise, so I have a hard time answering the question pretty directly, honestly.
Oh, I was going to say that I kind of have to agree with Amanda. That's not my field of expertise, but I do agree with you about how the media tends to go towards the negative more so than talking about the positives of things. And so, there definitely needs to be a change of that in the field of media. And yeah, I mean, talk to us more about this carbon thing. I mean, so I can have a better understanding.
Yeah, okay. Well, so the basic idea here is that federal legislation, state legislation, and this goes into other questions about politics, but like you have to have government action, right? Like you can't fix the climate by putting your bottles in a recycle bin or driving less, right? Like the individual actions of even hundreds of thousands of people are pale in comparison to what like regulation and government action can do. And over the past several years, in primarily Democratic run states, as well as through President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, all of the policies that are in those plans and that are in the Inflation Reduction Act are expected to decrease the United States' carbon emissions by nearly 50% in the next, 15 years or so. It's the biggest climate story in my entire generation, like the biggest climate legislation we've ever passed. And it gets, maybe a couple of lines in a larger story in the New York Times or on CNN or on MSNBC about what did this mean for the future of the Democratic Party? How will this play in 2024, right?
Right.
And that's just it's like you said, Shalom. It's news media's inherent bias towards sensationalism and negativity. And I think that's where politics negatively impacts people's health. That kind of story gets more clicks, it draws more eyeballs to the TV screen, it sells more physical newspapers where those still exist. Just even simply understanding that, right? Understanding that there is perhaps psychologically an inherent human bias towards focusing on the negative that has helped me incredibly in engaging with politics, because perhaps even more so than Amanda, I'm a bit of a chronic optimist when it comes to this kind of thing. I'm very hopeful and very optimistic, and it's this kind of story, I think, that lets politics, for me at least, have a positive impact on my mental well-being. Because for all of the very real serious challenges that the United States, the hemisphere, the world face today, this part of human existence is perhaps one of the best times in human history to have been born. Like, we're not all dying of dysentery, right? Like, this is no longer the Oregon Trail. Like, I think those of you who have been on the internet for a while will have heard of Hank Green's cancer diagnosis, and thankfully he's now in remission. But when he was first diagnosed with cancer, he shared a story of talking with his brother John, and as John has a way with words like no one that I've ever met before. Hank had said to John, well, the good thing about this is that this is probably the best time that anyone could have ever lived with this cancer, right? This is the best time to get this cancer. And John shot back with, well, next year would have been better, because even though we do have significant challenges, things are in many ways better than they have ever been before. And focusing on the negative robs us of the ability to see the fact that we are, in my opinion at least, truly living through a golden age of humanity. And I think if more people realized that inherent negative bias, it would be easier to effect more positive change, and to create more good news for us to focus on instead of the bad stuff. Wow,
that was amazing, honestly, especially how you just revealed to yourself that, you're a true optimistic person. And, sometimes I just wish that Twitter would just be like, I would just be more positive, because, that's where I get my main source of news, and how, like, as you were saying, that news tends to be more biased on the negative, and just having a platform just to be able to see more good positive news, such as what you're saying, can be honestly something that can really help the mental health of youth. And, that's what me as a content creator, and probably you, Amanda, as a filmmaker, are probably set to just spread the good news of different things of what's going on in the world. That's basically like my mission as a content creator, just to be able to spread even more positivity.
And I think there's something to be said, obviously, for trying not to see the world through rose-colored glasses, right? There are very significant challenges that face people all over the world. And in many places, things are getting worse, both for people, countries, what have you. And it's important to know about that kind of thing, right? It's not that we should just focus on the positive. It might be helpful for mental health, but perhaps not helpful for actually solving problems. But I do think that there is something to be said for deliberately choosing to follow content creators and to follow people on the internet and just in your life who do spread positivity. Like, I know that I am hopelessly, chronically, terminally online. And so I make an active effort to follow people whose mission is to share positive news, to share good stories. And I think that helps me with my what is probably, quite frankly, a bit of a digital addiction. It's helpful in both, understanding that there are things we are doing out there that can solve problems, right? Like, these challenges that we face are not insurmountable, while also allowing me to see, like, what I believe to be sort of the fundamental good at the heart of humanity.
I like how you said it's all about choice, because honestly, I think that is definitely something that more young people need to really, along with the day-to-day basis bad news that you often see, it's like inserting more good news into your day when you see, when you go on the news. All about balance is, I think, is what you're trying to say, right? It's all about balance, how, what you consume in the media, because we only consume a certain amount of media per day. And I think it's just good for young people to be able to actively look for platforms that have a balance of both sort of like sides, the good, the bad, just the in-between. Because there could be just one platform or one place where you can just see the total trash that you can see, or like another place where you could just see, the good and everything. But I feel like a balance is definitely something that young people should definitely consider.
Yeah, and also just recognizing when you're getting into sort of that doom spiral, right? And that's easier said than done, but sometimes I will like catch myself watching the third TikTok in a row, or going deeper and deeper through the Twitter thread and just upsetting myself more and more. And I'm like, this is not a good way for me to be spending my time. Like, I'm not gaining anything from this. I'm not, like, it's fascinating. It's like watching a train wreck, but you don't need to do that, right? It's about choice. One of the beautiful things about the internet, for all of its terrible places, all of its terrible algorithms and force-fed content, is there's so much out there, right? And you do have a choice in what you can consume. And I think it's the same with the internet and politics. There is good politics news out there. And yes, you need to be aware of the bad stuff, but there's no reason for you to let that consume every like waking moment that you have when you think about politics, and when you think about how to engage with politics, and when you think about how to stop things from getting worse or make things better. Doomerism doesn't help anything, is I guess what I'm trying to say, right? You have to believe that you can affect positive change in order to do it. Otherwise, there's no point.
I feel like it's also important to note, like, there was this term that I learned recently in a research paper about technology and youth and media and consumption, things like that. And the term was differential susceptibility, which is basically like a fancy term for like, we each have our own individual reactions or interpretations or feelings about platforms and social media, and what boundaries do we as individuals put on those social media platforms, or consumption of news, or consumption of Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, whatever it might be. I know for me, I have to, for my mental health, really manage the amount of consumption. And whether it's good or bad is almost irrelevant, frankly. It's more about the fact that I personally know that my mental health is better when I'm in nature or off the grid or investing in myself. You may have noticed I live in a van. If you're wondering about this sort of background that I'm in, spent the last year and a half converting a van from the ground up. And that was a way for me to challenge myself to actually disconnect and to invest in doing something different. And frankly, with kind of housing and the economy and with the world, I just felt like sort of having flexibility was important. But point being that nature and getting off the grid and getting out of the news cycle and more into books and kind of education and knowledge and away from all the noise has been a really important part of my transition into like adulthood and adulting, right? Can be really hard and it's a constant journey. But that differential susceptibility, I think about that a lot because I know for me, if I'm on social media too long, I feel really terrible. And who do I follow? And it's usually content about rock climbing and cats and vans and whatever. It's usually more topical, like interest based and less about people and my friends and family. It's like I'd rather connect with them in person than see what they're doing from the outside in. So moderating my own content, putting the filters, putting the boundaries, putting the time limits on it, and just honoring, for me at least, the value of also what do I do outside of that time away from my device and trying to invest in that. And at least for me, that's been something that I've tried to really think about more as well.
Wow, van life, how is that?
I love it. I think it's, and I think going back to one of Timothy's questions about like advice for youth, I think it's like, don't be afraid to do things differently, like go after that dream. And honestly, like I thought about it for 2 years before I did it. It was like I was at the beginning of a year-long lease in an apartment that was just going up and up and up, and COVID hit and all these things. And I thought, I'm going to give it the remainder of my lease to figure it out, make a budget, make a plan, design, watch a bunch of YouTube videos about van building. I feel like I got my master's or maybe my PhD in van building, translatable knowledge, maybe not so much in terms of the academic sense, but we live in this sort of DIY autodidact generation of figuring things out. At least that's how I like to learn. School was always hard for me, so I sort of like to learn in my own way, but I honestly love it. Shalom, and it facilitates those values like I was mentioning earlier of getting off the grid and offline and learning about things in a more controlled way for at least my mental health. That's been really important. And it is a little tough sometimes for sure. I mean, it has its challenges. It can feel kind of aimless, but I think signing up for classes or workshops or finding community and finding those spaces and those people and peers who we connect with is the most important part. So along the van journey, finding rock climbing gyms or LGBTQ spaces and meetups or other van lifers. I mean, it's definitely like a non-normative thing, especially at a younger age, being a LGBTQ woman traveling alone. It's sort of like, I would love to find more people out there who, are doing this, who also have similar identities and values. So it's a little hard in that sense. And there's some loneliness there for sure. I'll be honest, like finding community on the road is a whole other ball game. And I want to create more content about that. So there's this sort of dichotomy of like wanting to get offline, but then I also want to be online to like inspire and support alternative living and mental health and this kind of new brand I'm trying to think through. But anyway, I guess the message of not being afraid to do things differently is something I wanted to share.
I think just to take it from a perspective that makes sense in my sort of politics world is there are 8 billion people on the planet, right? More than 8 billion at this point, which is an incomprehensibly large number for humans, right? Like you just simply cannot fathom how big 8 billion is. It's just too large. And what I mean by getting at that is there is no one way to be human. There's no correct way to be human. How could there possibly be with that many people on planet Earth? And I think Amanda's statement of like, don't be afraid to do things differently. Don't be afraid to do things your way, how it works for you, how it makes you feel within yourself. Like it couldn't be truer because odds are with 8 billion people, somebody else out there is doing it that way, right? And they're doing it perfectly fine. Like they are surviving, they are thriving. There's no correct way to be human.
For sure.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to your point about unplugging, Amanda, and how it looks different for everybody and how they unplug and how so true. Being a content creator myself, sometimes it's hard for me to be able to like unplug when I'm supposed to like, look up certain things, certain trends to be able to help our audience be like, oh, okay, they're on doing this challenge or they're doing that. Because, that's what a content creator does. Unplugging for me is definitely something that's more different because I have to be on the internet almost on the daily. So I think having breaks such as like, deleting certain apps that tend to trigger some just triggers, I guess I would say, and just being able to just, have a time limit and stuff like that. Like, I just recently deleted TikTok because that is, for me, it is a distraction. But I was able to keep other certain apps on my phone, like Instagram, because sometimes I would just want to see, can kind of catch up with my friends and stuff like that. And I'm kind of one to more interact online more so than even outside. Young people have to find a balance on how to like disconnect, but also find ways how they can just connect in other ways, and just how they unplug and how they do certain things in their life. And honestly, just you doing your van life, girl, I'm trying to see you do some vlogging. I want to see you do.
We'll talk. Maybe it's sort of get a little, but I really just want to say I appreciate everything you shared just now, because I think it's really inspiring, and I can imagine there's a lot of pressure, right, with like keeping up with your family brand and with all the work that you do to make those skits and relatable content and positivity, and it's just really, I find it really inspiring and interesting to hear like how do you unplug and how do you create those boundaries with yourself to support your own mental health. And I think there's a lot of realness there with just like what happens off the screen or behind the scenes, and sort of I find that really like authentic and appreciate that. So thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you for your words.
I really get inspired by the stories, and the stories are just hard to the core, straight to the point, and they're really helpful. I think our young audience are really enjoying this conversation. Our final question, a question that is going to all of you. I think this is very important. What one message would you like to share with a young audience who might be going through challenges and could find inspiration and support from the stories and content that we create?
I think the message is that there's a lot of power in vulnerability, and both self-vulnerability and then sharing with others. And it takes, I think, a lot of courage to share when we're going through a hard time. That feeling of, oh, we don't want to be a burden, or it's hard to share, I think, things that are hard, that feel hard and that are deep and that come from a deep place. At the same time, I think more than ever, people are sharing and being vulnerable and coming out with their stories and with their adversities and with their traumas and how they're dealing with those things. And I think for me, a big part of my own recovery was seeking therapy and finding a place to safely share. For me, I know that I need to have that verbal processing with the mental health therapist. I found that really helpful. And then also the getting off the grid and getting in nature and investing in myself, and not feeling guilty for that, right? Taking that time off and having that you time, right? And that free time, or whatever that time is, where it's feeding your soul. And I know for me, I have my own safety plan of who are those 3 people who I feel like I can call, who I have a relationship with, where if I'm feeling like I'm going through a crisis, or I'm having a lot of anxiety, or I'm having really intrusive thoughts, or I'm feeling really lonely, or something like that, like whatever the experience is, there's a few people who we have like this shared agreement of being able to text or call, and there's this mutual consent of being able to help each other facilitate what that help might look like. And then for me, I also have this sort of wellness checklist where if I feel those feelings of anxiety coming on, or loneliness, or kind of those freak out moments, I have like 5 things that I sort of go through, like a checklist of what helps me kind of check back in with myself and feel grounded. And the first is that I ask myself, did I get good sleep? And if not, do I need to get sleep? Just fundamentally like my basic needs. And then I usually make a green smoothie. I know it sounds kind of silly, but I usually just feel better when I drink a green. It's like sort of just food medicine. I personally feel what I eat. And so nutrition is a big part of my mental health. And then working out, I usually go on a run, or get the heart pumping and get the endorphins going and get the dopamine going to kind of snap out of it a little bit, and not to avoid and not to escape, but a little bit of that balance of kind of grounding and connecting with my body, and trying to feel and trying to breathe and connect with nature and be in the woods and go on a run. And the other is being more exposed to really the elements. And part of that for me is taking like a cold shower. I mean, I know it sounds so simple, but like these basic things for me has been kind of like my checklist of grounding myself, like sleep, nutrition, working out, cold shower, kind of change the mood. There's a lot of literature on that too. the benefits of different exposures and different sort of therapy exposures. And then having my people, right? Having that safety plan of who can you trust and who can you call, and knowing that there's that mutual consent there of there's safety in those people that you can call and that you can text, and that they want to listen to you. There's that understanding. So that's been a big part of, I guess that's the advice that I would give, that more so that works for me. I wouldn't really call it advice because I think that everyone has their own needs and wants, but that for me, for Amanda, has been my journey. And then again, just consistently, actively being in therapy has been a big part of my wellness sort of journey as well. Yeah, not being afraid to be vulnerable and ask for help is a big part of it.
Love that. I love that. You know, being content creators, we really try to emphasize 3 things to our audience, especially the kids. So they are special, that they are loved, and that they have purpose. And when children have the knowledge of those 3 things, they too have the certain hope that they can change their circumstance and being able to make a difference in the world. I want to share the story about how last month me and my family were able to FaceTime a fan of ours who recently became paralyzed from the waist down from gun violence that was issued by after a road rage incident. And it was so sad just seeing her in the hospital. We were able to kind of cheer her up, just kind of talk to her and just kind of emphasize those 3 things. And despite the obvious pain that she was in, she was able to laugh and she was able to smile. She was able to have the hope that, despite the circumstance that she's in, that she was able to really just have the hope that she can overcome this. That's what being a content creator is all about, caring for others. It's about just being able to share the message of just love, and that they too just have the purpose that it's just not all going to be what your circumstance is right now, that there is hope that you can change, and that there is hope that things are going to get better. And so that's the ultimate goal for me and my family.
There's not much I can add to what Amanda and Shalom said on a personal level, but I think just to continue with my sort of theme of politics and political engagement, I think it's important to recognize that there's always going to be a problem to solve. And I think that viewing politics not as a race to get to a finish line, but as an ongoing process of improvement and an ongoing process of fixing problems as they arise is much more productive and much healthier. I think about a post that Diana asked me to write sort of just after the January 6th attack on the Capitol of how am I supposed to go about my everyday life? How am I supposed to engage in politics when this is what it looks like now, right? And I thought back to what one of my first professors told me, which is that the struggle is the point. There's never been a time in all of human history, and there never will be a time in all of human history when we have no problems to solve. Even after the labor movement won things like the 8-hour workday, right? There's still issues like equal pay and worker safety. After we've lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty around the world over the last 25 years, there are still many hundreds of millions more who are suffering. But that doesn't mean that we just give up. The fact that there's always another problem to solve doesn't mean that we shouldn't bother. Because, right, even though we struggle with gender wage inequality and worker safety, millions more children are now in school around the world instead of risking their lives in factories. Because even though we're still struggling with things like the legacy of Cold War thinking and colonialism and imperialism, millions of people around the world now live safer, healthier, freer lives than they once did. Even though millions of people around the world will go to bed hungry tonight, millions more children will survive through their 5th birthday and into adulthood because of global efforts ranging across decades to eradicate diseases like polio and smallpox. Because even if we were to pass universal healthcare, that wouldn't make pharmacies and doctors and hospital systems flock to underserved communities. But tens of millions more people would be able to see a doctor without worrying that it will bankrupt them. This is how I view politics. It's a constant process of improving the situation of people around the world one step at a time. And I think that's the only way, really, in my opinion, to view politics through a productive lens and to manage it as something that you are going to live through rather than something that's going to happen to you, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, I'll really thank you all for joining us for today's discussion. It has been very helpful. It has scattered a lot of things and things that I didn't even expect. It has tackled things that we the youth face. So I think someone is being helped somewhere.
Alrighty, everybody. Thank you.